My guest today is a member of the AMA Motorcycle Hall of Fame, a TRANS-AMA Motocross Champion, and the winner of the 1982 Daytona Motocross. After his career in racing, he obtained multiple executive positions, including the Director of Motorcycle and Marine Division at Suzuki, Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Arctic Cat, and Vice President of Motorcycles at Polaris Industries and Victory Motorcycles. The president of Mark Blackwell and Associates, I'm excited to welcome Mark Blackwell.
Well, thanks, Adam. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, I wanted to get as much of your resume that I could on there, but there's a lot on there. This of all the interviews I've prepped to do, I was pumped to tell you this because the past 2 weeks, I watched Dust to Glory about the Baja 1000. I watched On Any Sunday. A buddy of mine, Jesse Anderberg, is a big motocross guy, and he recommended that. And this was the most fun I had prepping for any interview.
Awesome. Well, On Any Sunday was a great movie, and it really gave a big shot in the arm to the sport of motorcycling in the early 70s. And I mean, I'm sure it's the reason many people are lifelong motorcyclists today.
I was blown away, and for anybody who hasn't seen the movie, it's on Amazon Prime. I was shocked by, it's a profile of, motorcycle racing at that time, but the level of cinematography, and I mean, it held up perfectly. And just seeing them do slow-mo videos of guys taking turns at 100 miles an hour and wrecking, it was really wild. So it's great to read about some of the things you're doing, but to actually visually see it, and some of the stuff we'll be talking about today, I think it helped a lot. So but we got a lot to cover, so let's sort of jump right into it. How did you get into racing dirt bikes?
Well, I was lucky to grow up in Southern California at a time when the sport of motorcycling really was getting ready to take off. And let's say prior to that, in the 40s and 50s, motorcycles were kind of big and heavy and expensive, and the imagery around motorcycling wasn't that great. The kind of Marlon Brando, the wild ones, that was the sort of image. And so as a result, a lot of parents didn't really want their kids riding motorcycles. And I give Mr. Honda credit for really driving a lot of the change. He brought his small, lightweight, colorful, affordable motorcycles from Japan. And he was a big visionary. He realized that the post-World War II baby boom generation was just at the perfect age. And if he could kind of change the image, soften the image of motorcycling and make it more approachable and make parents less averse to their kids riding, the sport would take off. And indeed it did. And so I grew up right in the midst of that. The high school I went to, they were some years ahead of me, but there was a famous band called the Beach Boys, and they did a song about Little Honda. And Mr. Honda's first campaign was, "You meet the nicest people on a Honda," and that totally changed the approachability of motorcycling. And so I was kind of right there at the beginning of that. And I basically bought a Honda 50 with my paper route money, and couldn't ride on the road, but I could push it down the railroad tracks and ride in the fields of Standard Oil, which was near where I lived. And a couple of my buddies got them, and you get two of anything and racing starts, right? So
yeah,
we had little play races, and I just was completely enchanted with the sport, the freedom of riding, the exhilaration. And I had done a lot of team sports prior to that, with baseball, Little League and Middle League and Pop Warner. And I was kind of ready for something a little different. And so that's how I got started. And within just a year and a half or so, I was racing. And fortunately, my parents supported it, meaning they let me do it. And the deal we had is, as long as I kept my grades up, I could keep riding. So that was pretty good motivation to stay focused in school.
You and my dad are pretty close in age, right?
Say it again.
You and my dad are pretty close in age.
I think I'm about 6 years older than him.
Okay, because it's funny, I hadn't thought of this until now, but he had a very similar story where like it was a gang of like, you know, young teens that all had Honda 50s, and they were like, even my Aunt Julie, she raced with them. And it just, I was curious if, because he never mentioned like the image of what motorcycling was at that time and like, you know, the change of it, but it sort of got passed down to us where, I mean, Austin, my younger brother, was riding around his Honda 50. I mean, I don't know how young he was, but he was young, you know, and it just was, we'd all be on big machines and he'd be chasing him around. So it's a great introduction to, you know, dirt bikes and motorcycling.
For sure.
And so how did you like transition from, you know, the kind of recreational side into more the competition side?
So at the time I was getting going, and as you saw in the probably on any Sunday, you know, it featured some of the guys racing flat track and TT, and that was really the American sport. Today they call it AFT, American Flat Track. It's had a big resurgence, but what was happening around that same time is a couple other visionary people had the idea to bring the sport of motocross from Europe to America. And so while I started in the kind of classic American racing, as soon as I saw motocross, I was kind of enchanted with it. As spellbinding. These European riders, they were like, you know, like from, you know, another planet. I mean, their riding style and everything they did, the motorcycles they rode were very lightweight, very exotic. And that became very interesting to me. So
flat track was pretty dangerous too, right? Like just from, I mean, you crash quite a bit and
very high
crash. Yeah. Like
very high speeds. Yeah. So there were, so yeah, I would say about relatively more dangerous and, you know, higher incidence of injuries and so on. But motocross, I was lucky to be very involved at the very early stages of the sport when it was just coming to America. And in fact, the man who was one of the drivers to bringing the sport, he's no longer with us. His name was Edison Dye. Mm-hmm. And he was the West Coast importer for Husqvarna motorcycles, this very iconic Swedish brand. And he used to hire a couple of the top Europeans at the end of the Grand Prix racing season and get them to come to America and put on, like I would call them, exhibition races in key markets. And the crowds would come and see that. And it just, you know, just like me, lots of other young motorcyclists got really excited about the sport. And then you pour the fuel of on any Sunday and you see Steve McQueen riding a Husky and, you know, all that stuff. It was just like pouring gas on a fire, you know, for a lot of us young riders. And I was lucky enough, Mr. Dye told me if I rode for Husqvarna, he would send me to Europe to learn about the sport. He said, as long as you bring back everything you learn and share it with everyone here, because we really want to grow the sport of motorcycling. So I think I was very fortunate in a way to be, my timing was pretty good, you know, and I raced a couple seasons in Europe, and that was a great experience for a young kid from Southern California to, you know, listen to different languages and all the different parts of the culture and traveling around in Europe. It was a tremendous experience.
And you trained with those guys, right? Like you.
Yes, that was one of the things that we realized is their fitness level was super high because the sport of motocross is very demanding, particularly the outdoor races on the big rough tracks that go on for, you know, they used to go for 45 minutes. And today the races are a little bit shorter, a little more intense. But yeah, the fitness was one of the things we really had to learn. And some of the Swedes were among the most fit athletes. And they even did some testing there that showed that motocross was one of the 2 or 3 most demanding physical sports. And they set up an institute where they really studied the training and tried to share that with the riders.
Yeah, like I think they mentioned that on any Sunday, like one of the guys was trying to like sleep in between 2 cars in the shade in between races. And like, yeah. I had no idea that motocross was at that level. Like I mean, it makes sense, but at the same time, I guess I had never really thought about it. But
well, your heart rate is like at 80% of the maximum the whole length of the race. So there's no real place to take a break or catch your breath. You're pretty much wide open the whole time.
Yeah, and a lot of extreme sports are kind of that way, or like X game type sports, like skateboarding. I've heard that it's the same way. Like a couple minute run skateboarding is like being around in a boxing ring or something, you know? And so I guess it's just hard to wrap my head around it some of the time. But out of curiosity, what type of like, what was because fitness has evolved quite a bit. Like, what were you guys, was it just run, or like, what were you doing?
Lots of running, running up and down hills, kind of agility work. We even used to do some things in the forest. We'd have trees that were felled, and you'd pick them up and do different exercises with the trees, and jumping rope. And we didn't really have access to sophisticated gyms in those days, so it was a little more makeshift. But probably the biggest area was a lot of running and running hills to build that stamina and also agility.
And you're still doing all that today?
Yeah, still enjoy it. Try to stay fit, right?
Yeah. If you were lifting logs in Arizona, though, that'd be interesting. So you took, like, outside of the physical conditioning, like what else? I mean, because it transformed your riding quite a bit. Like what did you? That was a physical component, but what did you learn from those guys?
Yeah, so nutrition was another part of it, trying to eat properly. And of course, nutrition's evolved dramatically. I mean, we actually had some kind of crazy ideas then of carb loading and different things you were doing. But the European riding technique, trying to learn to ride fast but smooth and be able to keep the pace up for the whole moto, 45 minutes in those days. Different kinds of techniques that they use to just to control the bike in the air. And so, when I went there, I watched the very best guys and just tried to emulate them, and then brought a few things that we had learned a little differently, how to kind of square a corner off. And, someone's drifting up, you can go up and come down underneath them and pass them. So kind of blending different riding techniques from different disciplines of racing.
Interesting.
In those early days, the Europeans, I mean, to put it in context, when we started racing against them, they lapped us like 3 times, I mean, that's how much faster they were. And then 2 times, and then 1 time. And then pretty soon we were keeping up with them. And then some of the Americans started to win races, and I also think that the advent of supercross racing, which started in 1972, that those races were shorter, but they were very intense. The start became really important. Being very aggressive in the corners became really important. And I think that aggressive American riding style kind of carried over into the outdoors, and the two kind of blended. So once we got to where we could keep up with them and then started to beat them, then the rider confidence increased. And, Americans have won, plenty of championships since that time. And the sport of supercross now is a world championship.
Okay, so this has kind of been a question mark for me, is like, what's the difference between supercross and motocross? And, I know it's a basic question, but I keep sort of.
Traditionally, motocross is an outdoor sport on a more natural track. Mm-hmm. And supercross, which started in the LA Coliseum in 1972, that was considered the first official race. That was more of a man-made track, with much more exaggerated jumps and different terrain. Because when you sit up in the stands, if you're outdoor watching a race and a guy goes by and hits a jump, it's way up in the air. But if you're sitting up in the stands, to make it exciting, they had to exaggerate all the features and make the jumps more pointed, and double jumps and triple jumps. So that's a simple way of thinking about it, is the tracks that are indoors or in stadiums, that's supercross, and the ones that are outdoors, nationals and Grand Prix in Europe.
And did you do both?
I did, yeah.
Which one did you prefer?
I actually preferred the traditional motocross, just because I was, involved in the early days of the sport, and I liked racing in Europe. I liked the big open tracks, the fast tracks and all that. But I eventually adapted and had some good supercross races as well.
Yeah. It's interesting. So you were, you were over there and then you came back and you experienced like a lot of success pretty quickly, right? Like what your takeaways from that training
Yes.
translated to quite a bit of success.
Yeah. So I was the first American national motocross champion. And then actually you said 82, but I won the Daytona Supercross in 72. That was the year that Supercross was really getting going. And then I went to Europe to race, but unfortunately in the final Grand Prix, it was a mud race and I took my goggles off and got hit in the eye with a rock and pretty serious eye injury. So that was kind of the beginning of the end of my career. The next couple of years, I had some ups and downs as I was losing my vision and depth perception, had a few injuries, and finally decided at the end of 1975 to taper my racing down and go back to school and get involved in the business side of the business. But you're right, I had learned a lot from those experiences. And, you know, I taught some motocross schools. I did a bunch of product development work for Goodyear Tire, the initial Fox shocks. I did a lot of the development work for Fox, Scott goggles, the tear-off system, the roll-off system. And that intrigued me more about business. And so then I started to push really hard on getting my business degree and try to take that learning and transition into the business side.
Did your vision come back?
It's about 85% now in the one eye, but what happened is during the period when I didn't really understand what was happening to me, I had those injuries and kind of lost some confidence, and then made the decision to taper down the racing and do product development work, teach schools, and then try to go back to school and get into the business. But today I probably have 85% vision out of the one eye.
Were you kind of burnt out? Like it just, the way you describe it, it seemed like you were super motivated to pursue like this new avenue and like, you know, those three things you said about product development radically improve things for riders. So like, not to understate that, but like, I would think having this long history of competition to then make a big transition to training other riders. And then you were the factory team manager for Suzuki at that time.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
was that difficult or did you just change your mindset? Like this was the new competition?
I think it just evolved for me. I believed I couldn't race any longer, but I believed I could, you know, enjoy the sport and contribute a lot based on my learnings. And I also believe that because I had some ups and downs in my own racing career, I think I was a better team manager because of that. I had tremendous desire to be successful, but I also had empathy when riders were having difficulties or injuries. I could kind of understand from their point of view and try to provide good coaching and counsel, and used a lot of the training. I mean, I would train with the riders and push them hard. And because of my knowledge about the motorcycle and setting up suspension and all that, I was also able to interpret what the riders were saying and share that with the engineers. So I think that background was very valuable to me in those periods. And Suzuki, we went from the worst team in the industry to the top team, the dominant team there in about 1980, 81, won virtually all the championships.
That's crazy. And I was looking at this. I mean, I don't know a ton about, you know, race team management and stuff. And I'm sure whatever it is today, it's very sophisticated, but it sort of makes me think of like some of the, you know, baseball managers that did play the game and they've gone into it. But it seemed like outside of just like being the like players coach and like, were there any kind of like streamlining or like what were you doing from a management standpoint to make the team successful? Because going from worst to best, it can't just be like you're hanging out with the boys and being like, you know, if you didn't do well today, let's get a beer tonight. Like there was obviously some strategy too, right?
For sure. I think there's lots of discipline involved to have a successful team. I mean, you've been around, you've been to the races and seen, you know, you never see a messy garage for a winning team, right? Things are in an order. There's a methodical way of doing everything, the way the car or the motorcycle is taken apart and put back together. There's very high accountability. Usually, you know, one person is responsible for one thing. So it's kind of creating very high expectations, having a disciplined process. And then, yeah, you can't be buddies with everybody. It's business. And if you want to win, you got to treat it like business. And by the way, it's a 7-day-a-week business. You don't get to take the weekends off. That's when you race. And, Monday through Friday, you're doing everything you can to get the riders ready, the bikes ready, the equipment ready, the spare parts, and very, very organized. And small things, the guys used to make fun of me, but we were the first team in the pits every Sunday morning. First ones there. Guess what? We got the best parking spot. We were closest to the entrance to the track. We could see where all the information was. All those little things add together to make a pretty big difference. And,
where did you learn that approach, though? Was that something like you were kind of raised like and taught, or?
I think early on, as I said, Mr. Dye sent me to Sweden. I also was lucky enough to have a mentor called Rolf Tublin. He was 3-time world champion.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned a lot from Rolf. So I just tried to look at the very best guys and try to understand, what is it that they're doing? Why are they the best? And kind of emulate them. And after you do that for a while, you start to connect the dots, and frankly, you see the guys that struggle, and you avoid what they're doing and try to emulate them at the top. And by the time I was a team manager, I had a lot of those experiences, so I was able to contribute them. And when the bikes weren't working, I was still able to ride and give feedback on the bikes and help with the development of the bikes too. So I think that was valuable.
I like what you said about the learning piece, and we're culturally, like when you were trying to learn from Ralph versus like another American rider, like it's kind of a weird thing when you're going and trying to learn from somebody and they're sort of going out of their way to help you out and stuff. Were European riders more willing to teach, or was it kind of observational, or like how did it differ from like American other riders? Because I wonder, like, if you're racing NASCAR today and you're a young guy coming up and you go up to Kyle Busch and start asking him questions about the track, that's going to be met quite a bit differently. And how was your experience with that?
Well, I think I was lucky because in those early days I rode for Husqvarna. Guys like Mr. Dye wanted to grow the sport, and they actually arranged to have a guy like Rolf Tublin be available to us to be kind of like a coach and mentor. He trained with us physically, just like I later trained with the Suzuki riders. And so part of it was I was lucky enough to be with a team where the business people behind it saw what it could become and what a bigger business it could become in America in particular, because it was the largest potential market. And having a few experienced people around that were encouraged to help us, it was quite a bit different than, like you say, just walk up to one of the top guys and start asking questions. That may not go so well.
Yeah.
And some people are more free with their time and advice, and I think it depends on your approach too. If you're if you can be an approachable person yourself, it may make others want to help you more.
Some of the people that are free with advice too, you don't necessarily want to
to
follow that advice.
Might not be the best, right?
So you go from this super successful race team and you go into the business side of things, which is, another large dramatic change. Sorry, I'm just looking at a couple of my notes here. Like, you worked your way up at Husky to VP of marketing. Mm-hmm. To my knowledge, you didn't have a background in marketing at that point. How?
Well, I had been going to, so I actually started out, so those very early days, working on the motorcycles yourself, being around the factory mechanics, being in the factory and seeing the production, that all was very intriguing to me. I knew I wanted to be involved somehow. And years later, that experience walking the floor in the plant, served me well in the days when I worked at Polaris. I used to be on the plant floor weekly, walking around, talking to people, trying to figure out how we could make things better. But I had originally started out wanting to be a mechanical engineer. And at that time, two things happened. I had a professor that kind of coached me and said, Mark, at the rate you're going to school, because I was going in the evenings and on the weekends while I was working full time. It took a long time to finish my degree. He encouraged me to, he said, I think your aptitude is better for business. I would really encourage you. And you're going to have more varied opportunity in business. And so I switched my major, finished that up, went through my MBA program. And I did have a bachelor's degree in business with a marketing emphasis. So I had been studying marketing and then learning more about sales. Later, the MBA helped me more with the general management. So I was going to school for almost 10 years while I was working full time. And today I still go to school. I go to about once a year, I go to Kellogg at Northwestern and take some executive education programs to continue to learn myself, but also because I'm a consultant now, I can learn things that I can share with my clients. So, but you probably got to start with a lifelong love for education and wanting to continue to learn and grow.
So that 10 years that you were going to school, though, was that when you were team manager?
No, I couldn't. I got out of the team management and from Suzuki and went back to work for Husqvarna. And I was a Western regional sales manager and product manager. And that eventually the door opened up to take over and run the North American business as the VP of sales and marketing, together with a VP of administration. So at that time, I finished my bachelor's and started my master's. And so for me, everyone's different. Some people like to go to school and concentrate. For me, I enjoyed going to school while working at the same time. It was very hard, but I felt like every day I could go in and apply what I had learned the night before or the weekend before in class or a case that I'd read in a book. So I think I learned more because that just suited my style.
How was like work-life balance though at that point? Was that, I mean, that sounds pretty demanding, right?
Not very good. My wife would tell you.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I would like to say just throughout all of this is you're a pretty free-spirited guy, and like you like to do a lot of pretty adventurous, fun things. So like to go from like, racing, motocross every day to then be sitting in a classroom and learning, like it's kind of not contradictory, but like it's not what you would expect. And like, was there any like application of what you learned as a racer into like the marketing world? Like, were you applying any of those same tenets?
Yeah, I think so. I kind of believe, I think that racing or any kind of high level sport, you need that discipline that we talked about, right? You got to get out of bed, right? You got to do the work. You got to prepare yourself. You have to take care of yourself. And I think that that discipline, the structure, the processes that you use, I think those are all the fundamentals of a well-run business or well-run anything. And so I think there is a lot of crossover, and having a high level of drive and motivation, which I always have, I think that was a successful component as well. And so when I see businesses that are really, really doing well, whether they have a racing background or not, I always see those disciplines, the drive, the determination, the organization, discipline, the processes. Nothing's haphazard, right? It doesn't happen by accident.
When you're in those situations though, like having that kind of background in loving to have fun, like when you for you personally, when you're making that choice, like the getting out of bed, because it is a choice at that moment, like what do you go to when you're struggling, or what have you gone to in the past? Because I've been fortunate to be around very driven people in my life, but I guess for people that struggle with that, like what do you lean on when that intrinsic drive is wavering at times?
Yeah. So I think a good analogy I could share with you that would really answer the question is I don't know if you watched it, but last Saturday night, Cooper Webb won the Supercross World Championship in Salt Lake City.
Yeah, I saw that actually.
And if you saw the way he rode, he had to get 19th place in that race to win the championship if his nemesis, Ken Roczen, won. And if Ken didn't win, he just had to finish. And he didn't cruise around and get 19th place. He got a good start, rode smart, but he didn't ride carefully. He was aggressive, stayed clear of Ken, but then he wore him down, caught him, passed him, and then he caught and passed Chase Sexton, who was leading the race, and won. So he had to get 19th, but he won the race because he's a determined guy, and I think he wanted to put an exclamation point on that championship, so there was no doubt in anybody's mind. Now, he is a very determined guy. He's very strong mentally, but I also know that he's worked with a coach who has trained something like 700 race car drivers in the world. His name is Jacques Dallaire. And Jacques has he was Ayrton Senna, his coach, performance coach, the last 10 years of his career. He's worked with IndyCar drivers, NASCAR drivers, hundreds of them. But he's also ridden or worked with some of the top motocross riders. And he basically teaches you a lot about your subconscious, the subconscious mind, and how to prepare yourself to where you focus only on execution. You prepare yourself mentally. But I think to your question, when you're struggling or you're wavering, what do you do then? I think there can be a process to take you back to that time when you were successful and you put yourself in a positive mindset. And I've seen that across a lot of sports. When the top golfers stand up there to make a putt, they don't go, God, I hope I don't miss this putt, right? They're thinking of how many times they've rolled that putt in, and they should act surprised if they miss the putt, right? And I think it's the same thing. If you're racing and you say, I got to win the race, I got to win the race, I think you have a much better chance if you execute every maneuver and you have a positive state of mind. And when you do have issues, though, because people get hurt, they lose confidence, how do you get back to that? There's a process for doing that. And I think Cooper knows exactly how to put himself into that super positive mindset.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I also think like momentum is kind of under discussed. Like when you're doing the things that you are trying to be doing and you just keep you get 3 days or 5 days or 7 days and you just build that momentum up. It's the friction of starting and stopping that's so hard.
I think that's very well said.
It's like day 6 might be less enjoyable than day 2, but at least you don't have to, you're not back at day 1. And if you don't commit to doing it and consistently doing it, nothing's going to end up happening. So
the training level, that it's not just the mental toughness, the physical training that those guys do. You've heard of Alden Baker that has his Baker factory down in, the top riders have trained with him, and his program is not easy. I mean, there are days those guys do not want to get out of bed and go train hard with Alden again, but then that drive and determination that I want to be the champion, I've got to do the work, And I have a good friend of mine, lives not too far from here. He's probably the top reining horse trainer in the world. And he said, people come to my ranch and they look around and they want to know what the secret sauce is. He said, the secret sauce is I get out of bed in the morning. I get out of bed. He rides 16 horses a day. And he won the biggest show in the world in early December in Oklahoma City. He drove nonstop back. I went out to his place at 8:30 on Monday morning. He's out training horses. I go, dude, you didn't go to Disneyland? Like, what are you doing? He goes, I'm getting ready for next year. And I've had other trainers tell me, they go, none of us are willing to work as hard as Andrea. That's why none of us will ever beat him. So I think to be successful in any of these really tough sports now, they're so competitive. You need tremendous determination.
I think one of the secrets though is like loving the work.
Mhm.
You know, if you love that what you're actually doing and it's not work for you, like everything is work if you're going to be doing something, but like if you're in love with what you're doing, like it's not, it doesn't feel that way. And on the days where it doesn't, it's not, it's, I mean, bed is pretty good, you know, like it's hard to get out of there. So, but so
Yeah, I
you
think
went,
you're right. If you have a love for writing, or you have a love for the animals, or you, for sure it makes it easier, for sure.
yeah,
No doubt.
I have that a little bit with doing stand up where like, you know, I've been driving down to Tacoma, Washington, like 2 nights a week. And it's, you know, 3 hours total round trip. And I'm going down there and I might be doing 3 to 4 minutes on stage. And like, but you learn something through that process. And it's like just being sort of getting like conditioning yourself to where like, you know, this is what I'm doing and this is what I could get out of it. And even if I don't, like, at least I'm not sitting there wondering, you know, what if I had gone? And it humbles you too, you know, that's an important piece as well.
Yeah.
But
But being kind of over prepared, I think is a, you know, and again, I see it in sport, see it in business. If you're over prepared, you know, your likelihood of success is way greater than if you're not, if you're just winging it, right?
I can see why you and my dad got along. He's a man with a plan too. So he anybody that went into his garage definitely could speak to that.
For
So
sure.
you did some time at Suzuki and you became the top employee on the business side of Suzuki, and then you transitioned over to Arctic Cat.
Yes. So when I went to Husqvarna, I was lured back to Suzuki, but this time on the sales and marketing side.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, Suzuki was actually, we were doing very, very well then. We did well in the racing, but then also in the marketplace, we were doing well. And during the time I was there, we had about 15% market share in motorcycles and about 20% in ATVs. So those were the kind of record level of performance that Suzuki ever had in America. And that was a great experience. But to be honest, I went as far as an American could go in a Japanese company.
Mm-hmm.
And when I had the chance to go work for an American publicly traded company where the factory was there, it wasn't halfway around the world. You know, I could walk in the plant. I could talk to the engineers. That was very exciting to me. So yes, I joined Arctic Cat as the VP of Sales and Marketing. At the time, we were just a snowmobile business and getting ready to go into watercraft. And then I also helped basically plan the launch of the ATVs, where we in my previous relationship with Suzuki, we convinced Suzuki to sell us the engines so that we could go into the ATV business and compete against them.
Mm-hmm.
But they also realized if we became stronger and built stronger distribution, that could help the snowmobile sales as well. So that was a great experience. We grew from about 150 million to about 550 million over an 8-year period. And then, quite frankly, I was approached by Polaris, your father, and a couple of the key people there to come and join Polaris, which was very exciting to me because it was a bigger, better developed, I thought, company with more resources and I think a really strong leadership team. And so I saw that as a great chance to keep learning and growing and to actually run my own business unit. So I took over as the general manager for Victory Motorcycles, and there it's a kind of matrix organization. You work across the company, but you're accountable for the result of it. So you have to go get the supply chain guys to want to help you and the manufacturing guys to want to help you. And you don't have all these people reporting to you. You got to go persuade them to help your business unit. And that was a great experience and great learning opportunity. Very challenging, but I learned a lot and frankly learned tremendous amount from your dad. Yeah.
What, I mean, I don't want to make the whole episode about him. This is something I'm curious about, because there were some rules about me working with him when he was there, but I've just heard a lot of people talk about how much they learned working with him. And I'm curious what techniques or what
Yeah.
mindset you learned from working with him.
Sure.
And again,
Well,
let's not be too generous, because
no, but
he's gonna be listening.
But I mean, Tom was, he was a top engineer at MIT and started as an engineer in GE and grew up and was running business units, quit GE to go back to school at Harvard, was rehired by Jack Welch, one of the greatest business operators of all time. So he was in, by the schools he went to, the work he did, and then working in a company that has that many business units and that many talented people. He had the opportunity to learn from some great people that mentored him. And, when he came to Polaris, he actually joined 2 years before I did. The thing I could see that he wasn't trying to do, he wasn't trying to turn Polaris into GE. It was a much, much bigger company, but it was understanding what are the things we can take from this big, giant, successful company that we could right size to help Polaris be better. And I would say the two biggest things that he did were recognize to build a world-class business, you need world-class people. So they put a lot of emphasis into how do we attract, retain, and grow the best team of leaders and engineers. And there was a lot of effort put into recruiting the best young engineers from the best engineering schools. And that point, if you look back at that point in history, that was a giant point of inflection when Polaris really started growing and gaining market share and, taking number 1 and number 2 positions. And so having the great people and giving those people the tools that they need to build world-class products. Those, when he joined, the business was around $1 billion. And I think when he left, it was around 3.5 or 4 billion. Today, Polaris is 7 billion. It's continued to grow, and a lot of that groundwork. I mean, there's been, other leaders since then, but the foundation that was created in some of those pretty important years, I think, had a big impact. And many of the things I mentioned earlier, being prepared, being disciplined, being driven, having very high expectations, pretty serious. I mean, I'm not saying we didn't have fun every now and then, but it was a lot of hard work, and I think to be successful in anything, it's hard work.
Yeah. And I mean, I remember where it would be, school started for me at 7:30 and I'd be waking up at 6. It's dark out in Minnesota in the wintertime, and he's, already been up for an hour, 2 hours, and he's leaving, says bye to me. And I get back home, I don't know, hang out, eat dinner, whatever. It's 6:30, 7 o'clock, and he comes in through the door, and it's like he's been doing it since 4 o'clock in the morning that day. And that's, as I've gotten older, I've realized that's not the norm for a lot of people. Again, bed is good. Like a lot of people really like that comfort, but that intrinsic desire is pretty powerful. And it definitely, I didn't get to work with him, but I spent a lot of time around him, and it's just a different mindset. And it's crazy though. One thing I always have found interesting about business stuff is what you said isn't extremely complicated. It's like, get good people, give them the resources to do what they need to do. But it's those simple things that are so hard to execute.
Yeah. The other thing I would add to that is the culture is trying to create. Culture is a very hard thing to change. But if you can, again, not to, your dad could have worked for dozens of companies. I mean, guys at that level had, they could do whatever they wanted, but he picked Polaris because he liked the products and he liked the culture, the history of it. But he also thought he could make it better with the right leadership team. But one thing that he did very much is really respected the history of the company. You know, 3 guys starting this business in northern Minnesota in a garage, you know, a little, you know, and just the drive and the determination and the honesty, the integrity, and trying to really preserve that culture and hang on to it even as the business changes and evolves and gets bigger. I think that's kind of an art, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine that that was something heavily preached at GE, you know, like it just, I think that's sort of him by his nature.
Mhm.
And, you know, he's always been that way too. I think, you know, being from Vermont and small
Yeah.
town at
Growing up in a
heart.
small town, and yeah, agreed.
But back to like the victory stuff, you know,
Yes.
you came in and I don't know that the whole story of like kind of righting the ship, but it was a rough start, right? Like you
Really.
were trying to compete with a pretty big name, and
Yeah.
Polaris hadn't been in motorcycles before. So what like how were you able to make those big changes, and what were, can you just talk me through some of that?
Sure. Sure. So I joined in about the fall of 2000 and 2000, the fall of 2000, and the business had just finished its 2nd year, and it was really like a sick baby in intensive care. It was, you know, we were losing money, we had quality issues, the team was kind of dejected because it turned out to be much harder than anyone imagined, and frankly it was quite different. And some of the people in the company didn't really fully appreciate that we were trying to do something very different than make a snowmobile or an ATV. Not that those aren't difficult products to make, but suddenly now we're making vehicles that go on road, and the on-road vehicles have to meet NHTSA standards, and it's just another level of, I would say, sophistication that the business had to have, even you know, a quarter of a degree off in the steering head angle on a on-road motorcycle that goes 100 miles an hour. I mean, you could maybe get away with that in some of the other off-road vehicles, but not on an on-road vehicle that has that capability of speed. So trying to really educate everybody that this is a different business. And one of the things that, as good as Polaris had done, there were some quality issues in some of the businesses. Our quality ranking was maybe 3rd or 4th, not 1st or 2nd. And one of the edicts that your dad demanded as the CEO in January of 2001 is, we will become number 1 or number 2 in quality in every business that we're in. That was like, we're going to do this. And it was about a year and a half of pretty hard work trying to figure out how do we actually do that, and studying, you know, the best companies that had world-class quality, American, Japanese, all over the world, and then putting together what became the Polaris development, PDP, Polaris development process. And so just much like I described earlier, much more of a process for how you develop and validate, test, make sure the durability, the quality is there. And fortunately, the victory business was the smallest and it was struggling the most, but it also meant that we weren't as set in our ways as some of the other businesses that had been successful in snowmobiles for years or in ATVs for years. And so in a way that allowed us to change things faster. We didn't have, we were just more malleable. And I'm happy to say that we very quickly, within 2 years, took victory from the lowest quality in the industry, not by my opinion, as measured by JD Power, to the highest quality in the industry. So we were the first business unit to do that using the Polaris development process. And as I said, I think we were able to do it quicker because we were smaller, we were leaner, and we didn't have the habits, so to speak, of the way we've always done it. And we had to. If we hadn't done that, the business would have been lost, I'm sure of it. And that was made very clear to me, is you guys have to save this business. Like, you have to save this business. It's crucial for the long-term success of Polaris. And fortunately, when we did that and we improved the styling on the bikes, you might remember the Vegas, that was the first new bike with the new world-class quality, with
Mhm.
beautiful styling. And we got some help from Arlen Ness and the Ness family to help with our design team.
That was
I
probably
think
my favorite bike of them all
it
too.
was a
Like
beautiful bike. And I think that that was kind of a turning point for the business, where the bikes started to look very different from Harley. They were much more attractive, and the quality was much better. The performance was better. That's when the sales started to go like that. And I think we had a period where retail sales grew about fourfold over a couple of years, and got the business, into the black. So if you said, how did you guys all do all that? I think it was incredible teamwork, incredible support across the company. Once we started to see improvement, everyone got excited about the business, because then, at first it was like people didn't really want to have too much to do with it, because it was like a sinking ship almost, But then when we started to turn the corner, people got behind it, and across the company really tried to help us grow. And that was fun. That was exciting. And there were days where you kind of go home and beat your head against the wall. But then when you start to get a little bit of taste of success, it puts a nice step, just a nice bump in everyone's step. People feel a little more positive, a little more energized. And it was a tremendous learning experience for sure.
I mean, it's crazy because I'm in a corporate environment, and to just kind of get your perspective on stuff, because a lot of times when you're the person that's underneath, doing the things for the person that has the vision or is calling the shots and stuff, you don't get all the visibility and perspective of it. So it's just very like interesting to hear kind of the top down perspective on stuff, because when you're the guy that just gets the email that, hey, this needs to be done, you don't always get to see it all coming together. But
yeah. One of the things that I had a boss, Japanese boss, a long time ago, and one thing that he taught me is, when you first look at a problem or a situation, you tend to look at it from one angle. And he really tried to get me to back up and look at it from lots of different angles. And when I finally became a general manager and was running a whole business unit, you tend to see things from a different vantage point.
Mm-hmm.
You have to, because you're responsible for the whole thing, right? And you don't have to do everything yourself. You have to have a team and build the support, but you spend a lot of your time trying to communicate and trying to make sure everybody understands what it is we're trying to do, and that everybody's rowing in the same direction. And so I think that's one of the fun parts of a business, though, too, is when you can see the whole picture, and you can see the importance of the strategy as well as the execution, as well as everybody being accountable for their piece. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, but there is a component of it too, and this doesn't really get communicated much. It's like, you're just a guy, man. Like you're just another human being. And I think a lot of people, I've struggled with a lot, where I'm around someone that had a lot of success, and like people have these ideas about who someone is when they just see them at the top, and it dehumanizes them and stuff. And like, you busted your ass to get to the place that you were at, and like that's a lot of pressure to be in charge of that much. Like for you, what was your 4 a.m. to 7 p.m.? Like, I mean, did you have any balance when you were doing that? Or
I think there were periods where it wasn't very balanced, to be honest. It was just a pretty tough grind until the business we started to feel confident. Okay. And it wasn't like we backed off, but you have a more positive attitude. You're more confident that this is going to be successful. And it does become for sure more enjoyable, and the team starts having fun, and that tends to pull people together. When things go wrong, unfortunately, that's when it's easy to kind of get at somebody else's throat or blame other people, and that never works well. But if you can build that teamwork, and nobody gets ahead at anybody else's expense, you all kind of win or lose together. And I think we really, really had that for sure with Victory, and throughout Polaris. It was a really good culture. where people really tried to help each other, and where we all felt like we were part of a winning team, you know.
It was cool for me because I was 10 years old at, you know, a Vikings game where they had the victory outside the stadium, and I got a great picture of that. And, you know, as I got older, the styling and the types of bikes you guys were doing just got cooler and cooler. So I remember it, like, from being a kid's perspective, seeing that first Vegas and being like, this is so much cooler than like, you know, it just got more and more rad. And then when you guys did the 50th anniversary, I remember Arlen Ness brought all kinds of great stuff to that at the Minnesota State Fairgrounds. So it was really awesome to see. And so you know, went through all that, and then what year did you end up stepping away from Polaris at?
So we've talked about, you know, some difficult times, some really good times, but I think, you know, when you think about how do we handle when we get in a difficult situation, very early in that run, there was a thing called 9/11, right? And we went out on the road to try to save the victory business, and we did a road show, and we finished our first show in LA, and we got up in the morning to fly to Sacramento to do our next show, which was going to be on Wednesday. So it was the morning of 9/11, and I got up and turned the TV on and saw the second plane hit the building. And, you know, we were within 20 minutes, I had the team in the car, and we started driving because we knew we wouldn't be able to go to the airport. And we were on the phone, you know, like there were crisis calls every couple hours with the leadership team, your dad and everybody back. So, I mean, how people handle very, very stressful crisis like that is pretty critical. And so I wanted to just talk about that for a minute. How did we work our way out of it? Because we didn't know if we were going to lose the company, lose the business. You know, nobody knew what was going to happen in those early days after 9/11. And then you fast forward to, we just got the motorcycle business profitable, and people were really starting to feel confident and feel good, and the whole company was doing well. And then there was a thing called the global financial crisis, right? And same thing. I mean, there's a few 6-8 weeks there where nobody knew what was going to happen. What was going to happen to the economy? What was going to happen to are we going to lose the company? And crisis management, I guess. So how people behave, and again, I'm not going to pat your dad on the back too much more, but how he managed us through those couple of events was amazing. And so the sad part that happened, not to be negative, but following the global financial crisis, the motorcycle market, which had enjoyed about 16 years of consecutive growth, and then was starting to slow in the 2 years before the GFC, the market collapsed by 50% during that period of time. And so a business that we'd worked hard to get successful just lost the market size, just fell by 50%. And that was a very difficult time and very, very stressful. A couple of years later, though, as the overall markets were doing better and the company was getting strong again, the opportunity came along to acquire the Indian brand. And we had looked at that twice before, but didn't feel like we were in a good enough position to acquire that brand. Mm-hmm. But then the brand was acquired, and the strategy was to have two brands to compete against Harley. One, kind of for younger customers that are more hardcore motorcyclists, and a more traditional brand that had kind of the heritage and that would appeal to the diehard biker.
Yeah.
The people that are less about the motorcycle, more about the community and the history of the brand and all that. And that was the strategy, was to have those two brands. Unfortunately, I had retired in about spring of 2014. And unfortunately, by about 2017, the decision was made that they couldn't keep both brands going. And so Victory was shut down. And the Indian brand, because it was the original American motorcycle, because it had a stronger brand heritage and more potential growth. That brand was chosen over Victory. So a sad day for some of us because we put our heart and soul, but those are business decisions that people make in difficult times for the health of the overall business. So that was a sad day, but for sure it was the right decision to take the stronger of the two brands. And we learned that the hard way, that having a brand is very, very important to compete against people like Harley Davidson and Honda. And that Indian brand has definitely helped.
Yeah, that must be emotionally though a very weird thing to experience, because that was your baby, right? Like you
Totally.
and you grew with it completely. And even though you weren't there at that particular time, like that decision was made like after you were gone, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it was tough, but you know, that is part of business. You know, you have to make tough choices, and you can't do everything you want all the time. In fact, most of the time you can't. You have to prioritize and make sure you pick the things that are going to provide the best return to the shareholders, and the things that are going to give you the best chance to gain share in the market and outmaneuver your competitors, right?
Yeah. Didn't slow you down though, right? Like you went into your consulting business and you're working with what, KTM and is it Zero Motorcycles?
Actually, no, I did for a while. I was on the Zero board a few years back, but I'm on the, so KTM is my biggest consulting client, and I work on the KTM brand, the Husqvarna brand. Now we have the Gas brand as well. And the business is moving into e-bikes and e-mobility. I also serve on the board of a small premium mountain bike company called Intense, which is Southern California based, about 25 years old, very, very highly regarded brand that we're trying to grow the business, trying to scale that business now. And e-bikes, as you know, are just exploding.
So what kind of consultant is always like a pretty broad term. Like
Yeah.
how much are you working with these guys? And like,
Sure.
because you're sort of retired, but you're still
Yeah,
learning, you're still like,
I probably work about, I would say I'm working 50%, you know, so is that a 20, 25 hour, 30-hour week typically, but I do have a little bit more control over my time. So I'm making sure I make time for fitness and riding my mountain bike and riding the motorcycle and staying positive. But I actually really enjoy working. I knew even when I retired from Polaris, I would want to do something, just wasn't sure what it was right away. But then I was approached by KTM, and the president of the North American business asked me to be his executive coach. And so what I've done primarily is work on strategy, executive coaching, training, and team development. So I've helped develop his team underneath him. When we added the Husqvarna brand, we had no team. So we had to put together a team and raise them up. And now this similar thing is happening with the Gas brand. So those would be the main things I focus on today. I am doing one other special project for KTM, and that is we're building a new corporate headquarters over the next few years. And I've been working on that for about 2.5 years on kind of project management, you know, the schedule, the budget, interfacing between the architects, the civil engineers, and the people that are actually going to build the building. And things go well, we'll break ground this fall and occupy in about 13 months, about November of 2022. KTM will have a North American headquarters that supports the US, Canadian, and the Mexican business as well.
where is that going to be out of? Like
that's in Murrieta, California. It's right next to Temecula in the Temecula Valley. And as you may know, that's kind of an epicenter for racing. A lot of the teams are based there. And we have our test tracks right next door. And so, yeah, I enjoy it because I'm able to use my experience to help younger people that maybe haven't been through all the things I've been through. But then I also learn from them in turn. And I think it keeps me young and keeps me on my toes. And then, as I mentioned, I go to Kellogg about once a year to kind of fill my toolbox back up with some new tricks, you know.
Yeah. And you don't have to, you know, do the 16-hour days.
Yeah, exactly.
To implement everything, which that must be kind of nice.
Well, there was a lot of over those years too, there was a lot of travel and continuously traveling and a lot of international travel. That's got a kind of takes its toll on you, I think. And so I don't travel near as much. And even before COVID, we were doing, video conferences and all that. But I think through it, many of us have learned that maybe you don't have to make as many trips as you thought. If you've got the relationships and you can communicate well and keep those going, these tools have definitely helped us, I think. And hopefully it makes business life a little bit less grueling in the future.
Yeah, I agree. It's been, I mean, at least for a lot of applications, just not necessarily just business, but like community type things, or it's just, we don't always need to physically be in the same room to get something done. So it, for people that have busy lives and parents and stuff, it just makes it so much easier.
Yeah, and you asked me a couple times about work-life balance, and I'm hopeful that for the current generation, that it does provide the opportunity for more work-life balance, a little bit more time at home, a little more time with family, a little more time for health and fitness, and just less hours on the airplane or commuting.
Yeah, I agree. But if they're listening to this podcast on the commute, that's fine. So I got a couple folks that are listeners had questions for you. And then I asked you for a couple stories ahead of time, but let's start with the listener questions. Favorite motorcycle to race or ride all time? And this is from that same guy from before, Jesse Anderberg.
Yeah, I think you said it earlier. I think of all time, probably the Victory Vegas was my favorite, because it was such a beautiful bike. And frankly, it saved the motorcycle business for Polaris. I mean, without that bike, Polaris wouldn't be in the motorcycle business now, in my opinion. I think it was that profound of an impact because it just changed the desirability of the product, and it solidified our relationship with the Nesses, who helped us gain more credibility. The quality of that bike was a game changer. And as a result of that, all the other great bikes that followed. So I would have to pick that as my single favorite.
Okay. Solid answer. I didn't know if it was going to be dirt bike or street bike. So I was curious. Let's see. This is actually just my question. If like one of the things I rabbit holed quite a bit prepping for this interview, but I came across like the Crusty Demons of Dirt DVDs, which was we haven't really talked about this, but you talked about how it started with street motorcycles and then it transitioned to motocross and to supercross, and there was sort of one more evolution that happened with freestyle.
Yes.
Which was mid to late 90s. Mm-hmm. And for anyone who's unfamiliar, it was, to my knowledge, from what I've gathered, was these guys that were supercross riders, Jeremy McGrath, Jeff Emig, they would go out riding on the weekends freestyle, and it would just be kind of riding big air type stuff, big jumps, sand dunes, and it never was really it was just free riding. They were doing it for fun, but it turned into this subculture and then into
Metal Militia, right? Metal Militia, those guys. And
yeah. What's his name? Brian Regan? Is that, or no, Brian Deegan. Sorry. Brian Regan is a comedian from Las Vegas that's very clean, but if you were coming up today, my question is, like, what style of riding do you think, if you were 17 years old, what would be appealing to you?
Wow. Well, I still think I would be more of a traditional rider. So traditional outdoor motocross, national and Grand Prix motocross would probably be my first choice. But it's hard to say. If I was growing up now, I would have so many other things that would have influenced me. So I might turn out very different and choose to be a freestyle rider.
Yeah.
The X Games and all that stuff is so exciting now. You watch the things that they can do. It's amazing.
It's unbelievable. I'll see if my producer can throw the DVD names in the show notes, but like just seeing how the creativity is blended into the sport and what the first backflip meant to the sport. And then, you know, just the first 360 and the, you know, the double backflip and how like just as these tricks came out, it started filtering guys out from the sport because it was like, yeah, I can't compete. I can't do those things. And then as those things are happening, the danger and the risk is, I mean, were guys doing anything like that? Like, I mean, was there any kind of free, like trick type stuff? Was it just wheelies and?
Yeah, I would say just wheelies. And, you know, I mean, you had back in the day, you had like Evel Knievel, right? On a big, heavy motorcycle. Now, today, Travis Pastrana did that jump on an Indian, right? Like a year and a half ago, on a much lighter, better bike with better suspension and all that. But the bikes back then weren't that great. So, yeah, I think, I mean, I don't know, remember what year it was, but Kerry Hart, right? He did the first backflip, and that was mind boggling, right? No
And
one can
then,
imagine that. And now that's pretty pedestrian, right? Compared to what the guys do.
I mean, then when he tried doing it, because the first time, yeah, no, he crashed hard. Either this one of the times he was trying to do it and he bailed off in the middle of the jump, and I think he broke his femur, and it just,
It's pretty
it was
nasty.
insane. And I heard Tony Hawk saying this once, who is a skateboarder, obviously, but he was saying the hardest part about a trick is you don't know if you can do it until it's actually been done. Like it's sort of this, is it even possible thing? And then once somebody sees someone do it, it's way easier to do it because, oh, that's actually possible. I can do that trick. But like until it's actually happened, it's kind of, it's this black box. And um, I'm curious, is there anything that's the next evolution coming for motorcycling? Like that you're privy to, or?
Well, I think electrification for sure is, I'm maybe not thinking of it the same way you are, as like what riding tricks and so on. I think they'll continue to get better and better. And, you know, they're hopefully finding ways to reduce the risk when you're preparing for those with the foam pits and the jumping in the water. You know, that's how they do a lot of the skiers do the jumps where they land in water till they know they can do it, right? So I would love to see that, just risk reduction as those guys prepare those tricks until they're very confident they can do it. But I think the biggest change that's for sure coming for motorcycles, I don't think it'll come super fast, but we're already seeing it in the E-minis. Like at the Supercross race, the KTM race was the E-minis. And when you think about that, what that can do for, like if you could come home from school and ride out in your backyard and not make a bunch of noise and anger the neighbors, that would make motorcycling more accessible. And I think that the e-motorcycles and the convergence, I'm definitely seeing a big convergence between e-bikes and motorcycles, where that some of the technologies will probably blur and the bikes will become lighter. And if they're lighter, you can have lighter componentry, and then they get even easier to ride and handle and better power to weight ratio. So I see some of those things happening for sure. And the e-mobility, that looks like it's got a lot of growth in it. I'm just not sure that it'll happen as fast as some people think, but it will happen.
It just makes me think too, like, you know, that's all, that stuff is great, but then you factor in that risk reward thing. It's like power to weight ratio changes. Then the first thought is, what can I do differently on this that I can't do on that thing? And the evolution of the sport is just fascinating. I mean, it's crazy that it's almost a cat and mouse game of how far these guys can take it. But
and I think, I don't know this, but I suspect that what the guys do on skis versus on boards versus on a mountain bike versus, I think those guys are all watching each other and spooling up the imagination, right?
for sure. Yeah, I think it is kind of a subculture blend. across those sports.
Yeah.
So my last listener question was actually from my dad. He mentioned, you're a bit of a Renaissance man. Like you know art, you know wine, you know motorcycles, you know travel, horses, everything. Is there anything that you suck at?
Well, I've been lucky to do a lot of things in my life and have the chance to do a lot of things. I guess it would probably be more like, are there any things that you wished you would have done? And I was a musician. I was a drummer in a band when I was younger, and I was a pretty good drummer, pretty good little band at an early age. But I frankly always wished I could play more instruments, play the piano, play the guitar. When I see those people that can play 5, 6 instruments and then sing on top of that, and that's something it just never fit really within kind of the things I was doing, having the time, having the money. And your dad, as you know, is an avid pilot. That's something I always kind of wanted to do, but just never had the time and the money at the same time. And so I don't really regret that, but being able to sit down and play a musical instrument, I think that's amazing. And I wish I could do more.
I know you were a drummer too. That's cool.
Thanks. It's fun.
All right. And I want to be respectful of your time. So let's maybe cover just one story if you got it. Worst crash as a racer that you ever had?
Yeah, I think the worst crash I ever had as a racer was a long time ago. It was in 1972. And Malcolm Smith asked me to ride the Mint 400 with him. And so I was a motocross rider. I only ever did a few off-road races, but that was one he asked me to ride with him. And I was leading the Mint 400 overall on a 250 on the first lap. And I was the bikes only had 5 gears then. So I was going wide open in 5th gear, and I hit something that I never even saw. I mean, I didn't see anything that I could remember. And next thing I know, I was waking up on the ground, having crashed really hard. And the rear fender loop, which the rear fender attached to, that was because I went end over end, and that was smashed down onto the rear tire. And basically I didn't have any rear suspension, and I still had about a third of a lap to get in, because it was an 8-lap race at the Mint Gun Club in Las Vegas. So I limped the bike back to the pits, and Malcolm saw it, and they got word that I'd crashed. A guy in an airplane saw it and radioed or something. And I got back to the pits, and by then I don't know what place we had fallen from first to 8th or 10th or 12th. But Malcolm saw the fender loop, and he yelled at a guy, and they grabbed a hacksaw and they just cut the fender loop off, checked the bike out, straightened the bars and stuff, and he took off, not knowing if I was going to be able to ride when he came back in. So he rode alternating laps. I did lap 1, lap 3, lap 5, etc. And when he came in, I was ready to go again, and we ended up catching all the way up to, we finished 4th overall and 1st in the 250 class. So, and that was a pretty big deal for me to get to ride with Malcolm, because he was kind of a god, to me at that time. And
The Mint 400 too.
Sorry?
The Mint 400, isn't that what's featured in Fear and Loathing?
I think it's in that Hunter S. Thompson book. I think he talks about that.
Yeah,
that was a long time ago when I read that. But
yeah, I think it is. So I got to ask about Malcolm. Just so I didn't realize. I figured you guys knew each other, but he was pretty, he was featured in that movie.
Yes.
What made him just on such a different level as a rider?
I think some of the things we've talked about. Very determined guy, very serious guy. He'd laugh and all that, but when he was racing, he was serious. Very, very talented and versatile motorcyclist. I think he's won gold medals at the ISTDE, and he's won the Baja on a motorcycle and in a car, and just very, very talented overall. also a very well-rounded person. You probably know he has a big motorcycle dealership that his son and daughter run now. He had Malcolm Smith Racing, which was a big aftermarket company, was eventually sold to one of the other companies. But he was kind of just a guy that, you know, race on Sunday, sell motorcycles on Monday, develop apparel and accessories, just a real well-rounded person. And the other person who was a big influence to me in my early years was a gentleman called Torsten Hallman. Torsten Hallman, you would recognize the brand today as Thor, Torsten Hallman Off-Road. But Torsten was that other guy that, along with Mr. Dye, brought the sport of motocross to America. So he would come over, build a little track, and then do a motocross school, and then put on a little exhibition race. And when I found out that Torsten was not just four-time world champion, but he was an engineer, had a mechanical engineering degree, had about 5 different businesses that he ran and ran very well. That was a big inspiration to me. And early on, I think it was one of the motivations for me to do the things I've done is, you know, I didn't want to be just a motorcycle racer from Southern California. I wanted to do more. And so those kind of people end up being pretty big inspirations in a young person's life. And Malcolm certainly was for me, and so was Torsten Hallman. And in 2015, I got to go to Sweden with my wife, Patty, and we got to sit at the Grand Hotel in Stockholm and have a smorgasbord, which went on for about 2.5 hours. And I got to tell Torsten, thank you, Torsten, for all the influence the impact you had on my life. It was cool.
That's awesome. Mark, thank you so much for coming on today. Really appreciate it. If people kind of want to know about your business or, you know, where can people find your stuff online?
Yeah, markblackwell.com. My website is my name, so markblackwell.com. And it was just updated recently in the last few weeks, as a matter of fact, and there's some different videos on there, and you'll see some of the things that you and I talked about. But if they spend a little bit of time on that, I think they'll find it pretty interesting. And you can see the different businesses I've worked on or I'm working on currently.
Yeah, I looked at it a little bit. It looks pretty awesome.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
That's
some good help
great
putting
stuff
together. So, well, thanks for the chance.
Yeah, let me just say before we leave, thanks again, everyone, for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to share this podcast with a friend and rate and subscribe to us. Also, please don't forget to follow us on Instagram at FNF Pod. We're going to leave you with Jaga